Hi and welcome to Zwia and Pals. I just got done seeing Captain America Civil War and that movie is awesome. You probably should expect this by now because it's a Marvel movie and Marvel movies so far have yet to not be awesome, but this movie is awesome. The characters are awesome, the story is relatively awesome, the action is awesome, everything about it is awesome, and Spider-Man's in it, which just adds a great bonus to it. First of all, Spider-Man is glorious. If you don't know me, I'm a huge fan of Spider-Man. I think everyone that grew up in the 90s at least likes the character, but Spider-Man is very dear to me. And Thomas Holland, I think, is one of the best cast Spider-Mans ever. Tobey Maguire, fine. Tobey Maguire is great. Andrew Garfield, he's great. But they each had their weaknesses in that Tobey Maguire, not really snarky enough for Spidey, while Andrew Garfield, not really nerdy enough for Peter. While Thomas Holland is able to get the humor across, and this is by far the funniest Spider-Man to date, and still be adorably nerdy and likable. This is important to me, and it's weird that I'm starting off with Spider-Man, but this is a huge deal for me. People have stopped caring about Spider-Man as a character as far as movies are concerned. Tobey Maguire franchise, 1 and 2 were great, Spider-Man 3, people were tired of it. Then they reboot with Amazing Spider-Man, with Andrew Garfield, Amazing Spider-Man 1, I think that's the worst of all the Spider-Man movies, but fine, people enjoyed it, and then Spider-Man 2, people are upset. So lately I've heard a lot of people being like, Spider-Man, why are there any more Spider-Man movies? Why do we need more? Spider-Man is an important character, and he's one of the A ranks for Marvel. And I don't think people realize that. Like, Iron Man, 10 years ago plus, back in the 90s, no one gave a shit about Iron Man. No one gave a shit about Iron Man even back when Iron Man first came out. I mean, the Avengers were basically made from characters that couldn't support their own books. So Iron Man, Thor, Captain America, Hulk, these are all characters that people don't give a shit about as much as like Wolverine, Spider-Man. And there's a reason for that, because Spider-Man is an incredibly awesome, important character. So to hear people be tired of Spider-Man really just says that he hasn't been utilized well. Enough about Spider-Man. Ant-Man's in this movie. Ant-Man is also great. Ant-Man is hilarious. I'm really happy that they have Hawkeye shooting Ant-Man on a bow and arrow. Ant-Man's another character that people don't take seriously, but I think this is a movie that finally is showing, hey, this is what Ant-Man can do. Ant-Man's great. And I love that Ant-Man and Spider-Man are both the comic relief for the movie. A lot of the characters will have some jokes, but Ant-Man and Spider-Man are the jokesters, and I think that works with their position in the movie. A lot of the Avengers don't really show up in the movie, except for one big fight, and that's pretty much the only time you'll see Ant-Man or Spider-Man. And Ant-Man and Spider-Man are funny there, and you can kind of tell it's because they aren't comfortable in that position. A lot of these Avengers are used to giant fights, and they're used to big battles and their life being on the line, and Ant-Man and Spider-Man are both relatively new to the situation. So you can kind of interpret their joking around as them being nervous and kind of masking it. And I think that's brilliant use of them, and it really lightens the tone of very difficult situations, which is pretty much exactly why Spider-Man has his jokes, but that's a conversation for another time. On the complete opposite end of the spectrum, the last of the 3 characters that really break out in this movie is Black Panther. Now, if you see the humor of Spider-Man and Ant-Man as these characters are not used to the situation, so they're joking to kind of mask that, Black Panther doesn't make jokes. Black Panther is very deathly serious, and anytime someone tries making jokes with him and interacting with them, he's kind of like, I don't have time for your shit. And that shows really how much of a warrior he is and how serious he's taking it. And when he does talk, which is so rare, especially in costume, there's like a wisdom to it. And he's such a, I mean, Black Panther, if you're not familiar with the character, he is such a badass. And he's one of those characters that will never be in a situation that he doesn't have full control of what's going on. Like, he is very confident, is always able to do what he needs to do. He's such a great counter to the hilarious Marvel way of things, where he doesn't have time for that shit, and he's just like, I'm trying to get a fucking job done. And he's so unlike any other Marvel character, and I'm very happy about that. The plot overall is pretty simple. The world is kind of getting sick of the Avengers always being involved with giant things of destruction. Each time something blows up, the Avengers are usually there. And a bunch of world governments are basically like, hey, we need to start cracking down on this. We need to start preventing this. So they they install an idea of the Avengers need to abide by our codes and we'll be in charge of them, so that way it's a government thing. Now, Iron Man in the comics and in the movie is for this because he basically gets guilted by a mother who lost her kid in one of the Avenger fights. And he's just like, we need to be put in check, we need to be held accountable, we should take responsibility for this. While Captain America's view is, if we're controlled and if we're just part of the army of the government, then we have no say in what's right and wrong, and if we disagree, we should be able to make that distinction. But Iron Man is with the government, and basically anyone that's against the government is kind of going against the law. So it eventually becomes a, hey, Cap's breaking the law, hey, Cap's doing all these bad things, you know, he needs to get arrested. And that's the main drama of both the comic and the movie, and why they're on opposing sides. It's interesting though, because in the comic, Tony Stark, this was one of the first comics I really was able to collect. It was about the time I got my driver's license. I was finally able to go to the comic book store on a regular basis. And I remember reading the original Civil War comic and not really knowing enough about Tony Stark or Steve Rogers. And the entire time I was just like, Tony Stark is a douchebag. Tony Stark surrounds himself with terrible people, surrounds himself with villains because they run out of heroes to help out, and he's just a terrible, terrible person in the comic. In this movie, they make up for that because now Tony Stark is surrounded by decent people, other heroes, and this movie does a really good job of balancing the two sides. You don't really have a primary villain. I mean, you do, but you don't really have a primary villain that they're fighting against in this movie, because whether you go in on the side of Tony or on the side of Steve, you'll see the movie from both of their points of view at different times. So you might go in being like, Captain America is right, but then something will happen with Stark and you'll be like, oh, I see Iron Man's point of view. And then something will happen with Captain America and you'll be like, I see Captain America's point of view. So any point in the movie, either of them could be playing the antagonist role. Primarily, it's a Captain America movie. There's a large focus on him trying to find Bucky, which frankly, Winter Soldier is more of a plot device than he is a character in this movie. But he's important, I guess. But it is a primarily Captain America movie, and it's very interesting because there are parts of it that really stem from being a sequel to Winter Soldier, and there's parts of it that really stem from being a sequel to Avengers 2. So it's a nice little combination, the two movies colliding into this as a sequel for two of them. One of the interesting things about this movie is that it really makes the most of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The fact that we've been able to relate to these characters and see these characters grow for years now puts a unique situation where you see them fight and struggle. This movie, at no point does it make you think that these characters don't still care about their friendship. They do. The Avengers are still family throughout this movie, but they still have to fight for what they believe in, and that forces them to have this tension. And that's something that you wouldn't be able to just get from, oh, this is just some random movie that we have like 2 hours with these characters. No, we've had years with these characters, and now we get to see it struggle to stay together. And that's something that lesser movies aren't able to do. I mean, Batman v Superman struggled to do this. I said in my review of that part of what makes Dark Knight Returns, the book that Batman v Superman's based off of, work is that it establishes that Batman and Superman had been friends for years and years, and now they're forced to fight because of differences, but they still want that friendship. And this movie is able to pull that off because they've taken the time to establish that friendship. This movie, in so many ways, it's going to be compared to Batman v Superman because they were able to get that tension and that emotion that Batman v Superman wanted to do and do it well in the ways that Batman v Superman should have been able to do. And that creates a very interesting point with this movie in that there is no world-ending situation in this movie. This movie isn't like, oh my god, we have to work together otherwise the aliens are going to attack, or this evil guy is going to get this bomb and blow up the world. There's no world domination plot. The tension of this movie is on the will their friendship survive? And that's where you get all of the drama. That's where you get everything. It's like these characters care about each other and they're trying to make everything work and they can't, and they're struggling. And I think that's a very interesting situation. That's something that you don't get in superhero movies. You know, you'll always get the superhero movies where it's like, oh, we have to stop the world from blowing up. You get that every single movie. This isn't your normal superhero movie, and it does something very fresh and very risky and very mature. And it makes the entire movie just so much more impactful because of it. Alright, I'm gonna start getting to some spoiler territory now, so if you haven't seen the movie, now's the time to stop. What I think is really interesting about the Captain America movies is they all kind of change the landscape. Since the Marvel Cinematic Universe is all really connected, the Captain America movies have been I feel like the most impactful. The first one starts leading to the creation of S.H.I.E.L.D. Second Captain America movie leads to the destruction of S.H.I.E.L.D. And this Captain America movie, let's just say that it didn't end the way I thought it was. In the comics, in the Civil War comics, Captain America dies. And most people thought Captain America was going to die. It had all of the components to Captain America's death. Agent 13 is involved with Captain America's death. Crossbones, the villain that shows up in the first 5 minutes of this movie, is involved with Captain America's death. Bucky's there to take over. And they've been hinting at Winter Soldier taking on the mantle of Captain America since the first movie. And they didn't kill Captain America, which is shocking to me. In fact, they didn't kill Ant-Man either, which a lot of people were expecting, because there's a giant guy called Goliath in the comic that dies in Civil War. I even thought that maybe War Machine was gonna get killed, since like every trailer ever makes it look like he's gonna get killed, but he doesn't get killed. In fact, I think the only notable person that dies in this whole movie is Black Panther's dad, which is like killing Uncle Ben for Spider-Man. It's a character that has to die. It's part of his origin story. It is interesting that they wasted his origin story before getting to his own solo movie, but I don't mind it. It's needed for his character. But instead of Steve dying, instead of those big moments, which I'm surprised they didn't do, they break up the Avengers and lead to you believing that they're probably going to build the Secret Avengers. Or a Secret Avengers is Cap's little Avenger group that are doing things on the underground, which is a really cool move, because each of the phases of Marvel's cinematic universe kind of has like a theme to it. The first phase is, okay, we're going to get to know all these characters. The second phase is, okay, now they're all a group. We're going to get to know them as a group. So now they're interacting. Now the world is connected. This third phase, this is the first movie of it, is, okay, now that we built it, let's break it down again, which could lead to so many interesting things. And my God, I can't wait to see what Thor and Hulk make of this when they finally come back, because Thor is in Asgard, and I'm pretty sure Hulk's going to be in Asgard. So like when they come back and they're just like, hey, where the fuck is everybody? You know, it's just, I'm really anticipating that. And I think the last thing I really need to talk about is Baron Zemo. Zemo is the main villain of this movie, and Baron Zemo in the comic is a badass outside of having a purple rug on his face. Baron Zemo is basically like Captain America's equal. He's this badass with a sword that is just, he's super old, and he's got like his face is all messed up. He's basically a Red Skull, but super cool. And I was hoping that they were gonna make Baron Zemo just a complete badass, and instead they make him like this wimpy guy with family issues that's entire plan is forgettable, and his whole character is forgettable. You write him out of this movie, the movie would still be great, but Baron Zemo, I think the best thing they did with him is they kept him alive, and they could have killed him, and they let you believe he was about to kill himself, but they left him alive after this stupid plan. And if you look at this plan, it makes no sense. I mean, it makes sense, but it's so impractical and so luck-based instead of intelligence-based that it really, in a real world, it would not work. In fact, a lot of this movie kind of doesn't make sense the more you look at it. Like Spider-Man. Tony Stark wants to make this whole Registration Act thing happen because the Avengers are responsible for this child dying. So what does he do? When he needs help, he brings a child in to fight the Winter Soldier, the guy that's been killing everyone. Which is just like, Tony, where's the logic in that? There is no logic in that. Just like there's no logic in the entire plan of Baron Zemo. But it's a kind of a testament to how emotionally driven this movie is, that you're able to just get away with it and not care. It's like, yeah, okay, Spider-Man's thing doesn't make sense. Yeah, Baron Zemo's thing doesn't make sense. But you're so invested in everything that it doesn't matter, because the movie's still great, and you recognize that these characters and these things that are happening aren't there for the events themselves. but more for the emotional conversations that can happen, or to bring Spider-Man in. It's a cop-out, but badass, and I'm happy Spidey's there. But like I said, I think Baron Zemo, the greatest thing that they did with Baron Zemo is they kept him alive at the end. And one of the only other characters that they kept alive in this movie, in this franchise, is Abomination. And this is important because Baron Zemo is a member of the Masters of Evil, and I'm pretty sure Abomination eventually joins that in the comics. I know in at least a TV show or two he did. Masters of Evil is basically the evil Avengers, alright? It's the League of Supervillains for Marvel, and Baron Zemo is one of the heads of that. So I love that he's still alive and Abomination's still alive, because I'm hoping that maybe down the line they're gonna bring them back, because that would be really badass. If they don't bring him back and he's just this forgettable character, whatever. It would be a nice little thing if they did that. And the last thing I really appreciate about this movie is that, when have you seen a comic book movie that left things kind of terrible? I mean, that's not like a second part of a franchise. This movie leaves you knowing that every single character involved in the movie, except for Spider-Man for once, has lost something and is worse off than they were when the movie started. Most of the characters are in jail, Iron Man's all fucked, War Machine's really fucked, and the movie ends with every character being brought down off of their mantle and just not in a good place. And I think that's really powerful and really strong, and you feel it. I mean, there's a handful of scenes in this movie that I'll look back on and it's still like, it drops my heart, because it's like, oh god. And that's really powerful. I mean, even Batman v Superman, as dark and mature as that wanted to be, still had to go and be like, oh look, don't worry, Superman's totally gonna come back, you see the rocks floating. But this movie left it at no, these guys, probably everything's gonna be fine, but right now things aren't fine. And just to compare with Batman v Superman, I also want to point out that Iron Man and Cap don't stop fighting for bullshit reasons. There's no Martha. They go and they stop fighting because one can't fight anymore, and then they walk off, and they still maintain that friendship, they still maintain a respect for each other, but they aren't going to be able to deal with each other until things get sorted out. And it's not going to be this easy fix. Treats it as the real world will. You go and almost kill someone, and you're not going to be your best friend for a bit. Things are going to be rough, and they tackle this issue in a way that not really too many movies have tackled recently, let alone comic book movies. There's a maturity to it. It's impressive. It's a big deal, and I think people should recognize that. A couple little last minute things that I just wanted to say, and I couldn't really sort in. Aunt May is super hot. Yeah, she's young. They're probably basing this more on Ultimate Spider-Man Aunt May. She's a lot more young in that comic. I also really appreciate that Falcon has a little robot that is totally Red Wing, and it's just a play off of the actual bird he had in the comics that now they made a multi-purpose robot. Yay for that. And lastly, fucking Giant Man. Ant-Man becoming super big. Like years ago, when they first announced an Avengers movie, I went to my mom, was like, man, I hope they have Ant-Man in it. And my mom was like, Ant-Man's a fucking character? I'm like, yes, Ant-Man's one of my favorite comic book characters of all time. I'm really happy that Giant Man ended up getting in this. Everyone knew it was gonna happen, but still, it was so good. And hopefully people will start taking Ant-Man a little more seriously now. Anyway, that's my review of Civil War. I understand that this is a long one, and if you stuck with me, thank you. Thank you so much. Please follow me on Facebook or Twitter, or subscribe to my YouTube channel, or don't. I don't care. Thanks for watching.